The gunshot echoed across Caldwell, Idaho like thunder on a cloudless day, making Scarlett Turner flinch as she huddled behind the empty water trough. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the copper taste of blood from her split lip reminding her of the beating she'd just escaped. The year was 1885, and in this unforgiving frontier town, a woman accused of theft had few allies and even fewer options. "Come out, you thieving whore," the shopkeeper's voice boomed from the street. "You'll hang for what you took." Scarlett hadn't stolen anything, but the word of a wealthy merchant carried more weight than the desperate denials of a woman with no family and a questionable past. She clutched the tattered edges of her shawl tighter around her shoulders, wincing at the pain shooting through her ribs where the man's boot had connected. "Madam, you might want to find better cover." The voice was low and steady, startling her so badly she nearly cried out. A man crouched beside her, his weather-beaten face partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his denim pants and leather vest, suggesting he'd ridden hard to reach town. His eyes, a striking shade of blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed her quickly. "I'm not looking for help," she whispered fiercely. "Please just go." Another gunshot split the air and she instinctively ducked lower. "The way I see it," the stranger said calmly, "you've got about 10 seconds before they check behind this trough. I've got a horse around the corner." He extended a calloused hand. "Name's Hayes Landon." "They'll shoot you too," Scarlett warned, even as her eyes darted toward the alleyway he'd indicated. "Maybe." His mouth quirked up on one side. "I've had worse odds." The sound of boots on the boardwalk spurred her decision. With her heart hammering against her bruised ribs, she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They moved in a low crouch along the back of the livery stable, the stranger Hayes keeping his body between her and the street. A magnificent chestnut stallion stood waiting, already saddled and looking as ready for flight as she felt. Without asking permission, Hayes lifted her onto the horse and swung up behind her in one fluid motion. His arm circled her waist securely as he clicked to the horse, and they were galloping out of town before she could catch her breath. The wind whipped tears from her eyes as they rode, putting distance between themselves and the angry mob. Pain throbbed throughout Scarlett's body, but the terror of capture kept her silent and upright. They rode for what seemed like hours, following creek beds and cutting through dense stands of cottonwoods to mask their trail. When Hayes finally slowed the horse to a walk, the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains. He guided them into a small clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines, dismounted, and helped her down. Scarlett's legs buckled beneath her, and she would have fallen if not for his steady hands. "Easy now," he murmured, leading her to a fallen log. "Let's take a look at those injuries." "Why did you help me?" The question tumbled from her lips before she could stop it. "You don't know me. You don't know what they're saying I did." Hayes unsaddled his horse, his movements efficient and practiced. "I know what I saw. A woman being chased by men with guns tends to be the one who needs helping, not hunting. They'll come after you too now," she said, wincing as she touched her swollen lip. "I'm not worth the trouble." "Let me be the judge of that." He knelt before her, producing a clean handkerchief from his pocket and dipping it into his canteen. With unexpected gentleness, he dabbed at the dried blood on her face. "I'm guessing you didn't do what they're accusing you of." Scarlett's laugh was bitter. "Does it matter? I'm a woman alone in a town where I don't belong. My word against theirs was never going to be enough. It matters to me." His eyes, level with hers as he tended her wounds, held no judgment. "Truth tends to be important when you're deciding who to risk your neck for." She looked away. "I worked at the mercantile. The owner's wife accused me of stealing money from the till. I didn't, but—" she trailed off. The owner had been, insistent with his attentions. When I refused him, suddenly money was missing. Hayes nodded as if her explanation confirmed something he'd already suspected. So you ran. I tried to explain, but no one would listen. The memory of those terrifying moments made her voice shake. They were going to lock me up until the circuit judge came through. 2 weeks in a cell with the man who she couldn't finish the sentence. You don't need to explain more. Hayes stood and retrieved a small pot from his saddlebag. I'm going to build a fire and make some coffee, then we'll figure out our next move. Scarlett stared at him. Mr. Landon, I appreciate your help, but you should leave me here. I can make my way to the next town. You've done enough. He paused in gathering kindling. And what's waiting for you in the next town? More of the same, I'd imagine. A woman traveling alone tends to attract the wrong kind of attention. She couldn't argue with that logic. I don't deserve saving, she said softly. I've made too many mistakes. This is justice catching up to me. Hayes looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. Then he shook his head slightly. Then let me do it anyway, he whispered, the words barely audible over the rustling of pine needles in the evening breeze. The simple declaration left her speechless. She watched as he skillfully built a small, smokeless fire and set water to boil. His movements were economical, suggesting years spent surviving in the wilderness. Only when the coffee was brewing did he speak again. I've got a small ranch about 2 days' ride from here. It's nothing fancy, but it's off the main trails. You'd be safe there while you heal up and decide what to do next. Why would you offer that to a stranger? Suspicion edged into her voice. She'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Hayes seemed to understand her unspoken concern. I've been where you are, madam, on the wrong side of someone else's lies. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see past what others say. He handed her a tin cup of hot coffee, and the warmth seeping into her palms felt like the first comfort she'd known in days. As the night settled around them, Hayes explained that he'd been in Caldwell to sell some horses and had been heading home when he'd witnessed the commotion. I didn't mean to drag you into my troubles, Scarlett said after they'd eaten a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from his provisions. Life's full of trouble, Hayes replied, banking the fire for the night. The trick is knowing which ones are worth taking on. He spread his bedroll on the far side of the fire and offered her his coat as an extra blanket. Get some sleep, Miss Turner. We've got a long ride ahead. Scarlett, she said, if we're going to be traveling together, you might as well use my name. He nodded, the hint of a smile touching his lips. Scarlett, then. Good night. That night, despite her injuries and the uncertainty of her future, Scarlett slept better than she had in weeks. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the reassuring presence of the stranger who had risked everything to help her. Morning arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the smell of fresh coffee. Scarlett opened her eyes to find Hayes already up, tending the fire and preparing a breakfast of bacon and biscuits. The domestic scene seemed at odds with the dangerous circumstances that had brought them together. How are you feeling? He asked, noticing she was awake. Scarlett sat up gingerly, taking stock of her injuries. Better than I expected. It wasn't entirely true. Her ribs ached fiercely, and her face felt swollen, but she wouldn't complain. We should change that bandage on your arm, Hayes said, nodding toward the crude wrap he'd fashioned the night before. And then we'll get moving. I'd rather not stay in one place too long until we're well clear of Caldwell. As he unwrapped her arm, revealing an ugly gash where she'd caught it on a nail while fleeing, Scarlett studied him openly. In the morning light, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes and strands of silver threading through his brown hair at the temples. His hands, though calloused from work, were steady and careful as they cleaned and rebandaged her wound. "Have you always been a rancher, Mr. Landon?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the sting of the alcohol he applied to the cut. "Hayes," he corrected. "And no. I was a soldier for a while, then a marshal." A shadow crossed his face. Ranching came later. Something in his tone discouraged further questions, and Scarlett respected his privacy. They ate quickly, packed up camp, and were back on the trail before the sun had climbed fully above the eastern ridge. The day's journey took them through increasingly rugged country. Hayes seemed to deliberately choose the most obscure paths, sometimes doubling back or fording shallow streams to confuse any potential pursuit. Despite her protests, he insisted she ride while he walked, leading the horse through the most difficult terrain. By midday, the pain in Scarlett's ribs had intensified to the point where each breath felt like fire. She tried to hide her discomfort, but Hayes's sharp eyes missed nothing. "We'll rest here," he announced, stopping beside a small spring sheltered by a grove of aspens. "That side of yours needs tending." "I'm fine," Scarlett insisted, even as she struggled to dismount without gasping. Hayes helped her down, his touch impersonal yet somehow comforting. "Stubbornness won't heal those ribs any faster. Let me help you." Too exhausted to argue, she allowed him to examine her side. His face darkened when he saw the extensive bruising that had blossomed overnight. "We need to bind these properly," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The man who did this isn't worth your rage," Scarlett interrupted. "He's not the first to think a woman alone is fair game, and he won't be the last." Hayes met her eyes, a question in his gaze that she couldn't quite interpret. "That doesn't make it right." "No," she agreed softly. "It doesn't." He fashioned a tight wrap from strips of clean cloth, working with a surprising knowledge of field medicine that spoke to his years as a soldier. When he finished, Scarlett found she could breathe more easily, the support alleviating some of the pain. "Thank you," she said, truly grateful. "Not just for this, but for everything. I'm not sure I would have survived last night without your help." Hayes nodded, seeming uncomfortable with her gratitude. "We should move on. I know a place about 5 miles ahead where we can camp for the night. It's more defensible than this spot." The word defensible reminded Scarlett of the danger they were still in. "Do you think they're following us?" "I think it's best to assume they might be." He helped her back onto the horse. Men like that shopkeeper don't take kindly to having their authority questioned, especially by a woman who's proved them liars. They traveled until dusk, making camp in a small cave set into a rocky hillside. Hayes built their fire deep inside where the light wouldn't be visible from the trail below. As they ate a supper of beans and salt pork, Scarlett found herself studying the taciturn cowboy who had upended his own life to save hers. "You never asked what I was doing in Caldwell," she said finally. "Or where I came from before that." Hayes shrugged. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." His lack of curiosity was refreshing after the prying questions and judgmental stares she'd grown accustomed to. "I came west after my parents died," she offered. "There wasn't much left for me in Boston after the fever took them. That's a long way to travel alone." "I wasn't alone at first." Scarlett stared into the flames, remembering. "I was engaged. Samuel was going to start a law practice in San Francisco. We were going to have a grand adventure." Her laugh held no humor. "He lasted as far as St. Louis before deciding the West wasn't for him after all, or perhaps I wasn't." Hayes didn't offer platitudes, and she appreciated that. "So you continued on alone." "I had already sold everything. There was nothing to go back to." She shrugged, trying to make light of the devastation she'd felt. I worked my way west, cooking, cleaning, whatever honest work I could find. Caldwell was just the latest stop. And the last, hopefully, Hayes said, his expression softening. Everyone deserves a place where they can start fresh. Is that what your ranch was for you? Scarlett asked. A fresh start. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, then he nodded slowly. After the war, I couldn't settle. Took the marshal's badge thinking it would give me purpose. His mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. Turned out trading one kind of violence for another wasn't much of a change. What happened? She asked softly. Hayes stared into the fire for so long that Scarlett began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but she could hear the old pain beneath the surface. I was tracking a gang that had been terrorizing homesteaders along the Snake River, caught up to them near a small settlement. There was a shootout. He paused. A young woman got caught in the crossfire. My bullet. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat. It was an accident, she said, though she knew words could do little to ease such a burden. Doesn't make her any less dead. His eyes, when they met hers, were haunted. I resigned the next day. Bought the ranch with my savings, and what the government still owed me from my service. Figured I could do less harm raising horses than trying to enforce the law. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Both of them carried regrets, wounds that went deeper than physical injuries. We should get some sleep, Hayes said finally, breaking the spell. I'll take first watch. You can't stay awake all night, Scarlett protested. I can take a turn. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him. Wake me in 4 hours, then. As Hayes stretched out on his bedroll, Scarlett sat near the cave entrance, pistol which he'd shown her how to use earlier resting in her lap. The night was clear and still, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamond dust. In another life she might have found it beautiful. Now, each shadow seemed to hide potential danger. Her mind kept returning to Hayes's story, to the guilt he still carried. She understood that kind of burden all too well. Her own past held mistakes she could never undo, people she'd failed. Perhaps that was why she'd recognized something in this solemn cowboy from the first moment, a kindred spirit wounded by life's cruelties, but not broken by them. The hours passed slowly. True to her word, Scarlett woke Hayes when her watch was done and took his place on the bedroll. Sleep came surprisingly easily, her body exhausted from the journey and her mind calmed by the knowledge that she was, for the moment at least, safe. The next day brought them deeper into the wilderness. The trail narrowed, winding through dense forest and across rocky ridges. Scarlett insisted on walking part of the way, unwilling to burden the horse and needing to stretch her stiffening muscles. Hayes didn't argue, but he kept his pace slow and stopped frequently to let her rest. We should reach the ranch by nightfall, he told her during one such break. It's nothing fancy, but there's a solid roof and 4 walls. It sounds like paradise after sleeping on the ground, Scarlett said with a small smile. I just hope my presence doesn't bring trouble to your doorstep. Hayes handed her the canteen. Trouble tends to find me whether I invite it or not. At least this time it's for a worthy cause. The compliment, casual though it was, brought an unexpected warmth to Scarlett's cheeks. It had been so long since anyone had seen value in her, had deemed her worthy of protection. They continued on, the terrain gradually shifting from forest to rolling grassland. In the late afternoon, Hayes pointed toward a distant ridge. Homes just beyond that. As they crested the hill, Scarlett got her first glimpse of Hayes's ranch. A sturdy log cabin sat in a natural clearing, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A barn and corral stood nearby, where several horses grazed peacefully. A small creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods that had just begun to change color with the approaching autumn. "It's beautiful," she said honestly, taking in the peaceful scene. Hayes looked pleased despite his attempt to remain nonchalant. "It's nothing grand, but it's mine, paid for free and clear." As they approached, the cabin door opened and an older man stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. He lowered it immediately upon recognizing Hayes. "You're back early," the man called, his gaze shifting curiously to Scarlett. "And with company." "Sela's," Hayes greeted him. "This is Miss Scarlett Turner. She'll be staying with us for a while." His tone suggested no further explanation would be forthcoming. "Scarlett, this is Silas Morgan, my neighbor and friend. He keeps an eye on things when I'm away." The older man tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, welcome to Silver Creek Ranch." "Thank you," Scarlett replied, suddenly conscious of her battered appearance and disheveled clothes. If Silas noticed her injuries, he was too polite to mention them. "I've kept the fire going and there's stew on the stove. Figured you'd be hungry after your journey." "You're a good man, Silas," Hayes said warmly. "Will you stay and eat with us?" The older man shook his head. "Martha's expecting me back, but I'll come by tomorrow to help with those fence posts you wanted to set." His eyes twinkled as they landed on Scarlett again. "Pleasure meeting you, Miss Turner." After Silas departed, Hayes helped Scarlett down from the horse and led her toward the cabin. "He won't ask questions," he assured her. "Silas understands about privacy." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rocking chair and worn sofa placed before it. A rough-hewn table and chairs stood in what served as the kitchen area. 2 doors led off from the main room, which Scarlett assumed were bedrooms. "It's not much," Hayes said, suddenly seeming almost shy, "but it's warm and dry." "It's wonderful," Scarlett responded honestly. After weeks of rented rooms and then nights spent on the hard ground, the cozy cabin felt luxurious. "You can have my room," Hayes continued, gesturing to one of the doors. "I'll bunk out here on the sofa." "I couldn't possibly. I insist." His tone brooked no argument. "You need proper rest to heal, and that means a real bed." Too exhausted to protest further, Scarlett nodded gratefully. Hayes showed her to the bedroom, a simply furnished space with a sturdy bed, chest of drawers, and washstand. A colorful quilt covered the bed, the only decorative touch in the otherwise utilitarian room. "I'll bring in some hot water for washing up," Hayes said. "There are some clothes in the chest that might fit you. They belong to my sister. She visits occasionally and leaves things here." Alone in the room, Scarlett sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. From certain capture and possible death to sitting in the bedroom of a man she barely knew, yet who had risked everything to save her. It seemed unreal. The clothes Hayes had mentioned proved to be simple but well-made cotton dresses, a woolen skirt, and several shirtwaists. Scarlett selected a blue dress that looked close to her size and laid it out on the bed. When Hayes returned with a steaming pitcher of water, she thanked him again. "Dinner will be ready when you are," he said, closing the door behind him to give her privacy. The hot water was a blessing. Scarlett cleaned away 2 days' worth of trail dust and dried blood, wincing at the sight of her bruises in the small mirror above the washstand. The blue dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose around the waist. She combed her auburn hair with her fingers, wishing for a proper brush but grateful for even this simple opportunity to feel human again. When she emerged, Hayes was setting the table. He glanced up, and for a brief moment, Scarlett saw surprise and something else, admiration, perhaps flash in his eyes before he schooled his expression back to polite neutrality. "Feeling better?" he asked, pulling out a chair for her. "Much. Thank you for the clothes." I'll find a way to repay your sister when I can." Hayes ladled stew into bowls and placed one before her. "No need. Sarah would be happy to know they're being put to good use." He sat across from her. "She's in Denver now with her husband. She's a doctor's wife, if you can believe it." The stew was delicious, rich with vegetables and chunks of tender beef. Scarlett hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite touched her lips. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the crackling of the fire. "You should be safe here," Hayes said eventually. "The nearest town is 15 miles away, and not many people know about this place. I keep to myself mostly." "I can't stay long," Scarlett replied, though the thought of leaving this haven already filled her with dread. "I need to find work, make a new start somewhere." Hayes frowned slightly. "There's no rush. Winter's coming on and the passes will be closing soon anyway. You'd be better off waiting until spring." The idea of spending months here in this peaceful place with this quietly intense man stirred emotions Scarlett wasn't ready to examine. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition. The truth is," he paused, seeming to search for words, "it gets lonely out here sometimes. Having someone to talk to would be nice." The simple admission touched Scarlett deeply. In Hayes Landon, she sensed a kindred spirit, someone who understood isolation and loss, who had built walls to protect himself but who still yearned for human connection. "Then perhaps I will stay, at least until the weather clears," she conceded. "But I insist on earning my keep. I'm a good cook and I can sew and clean." Hayes nodded, and if she wasn't mistaken, there was relief in his eyes. "We'll figure it all out tomorrow. For now, you should rest." That night, lying in Hayes's bed surrounded by the unfamiliar but comforting scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to everything he owned, Scarlett allowed herself to hope. Not for anything as grand as happiness. She'd learned long ago that such expectations led only to disappointment, but for peace. For a respite from running and hiding and constantly looking over her shoulder. Outside, she could hear Hayes moving about, stoking the fire for the night. The sounds were oddly comforting, a reminder that she wasn't alone. As sleep claimed her, Scarlett's last conscious thought was that perhaps, just this once, her life had taken a turn for the better. The days slipped into a rhythm that surprised Scarlett with its ease. Despite her injuries, she insisted on contributing to the daily work of the ranch. She took over the cooking and mending, tasks Hayes clearly appreciated given the improved state of their meals and his clothes. As she healed, she gradually added more duties, feeding the chickens, tending the small vegetable garden, and eventually helping with the horses, which she discovered she had a natural affinity for. Hayes spent his days working the ranch, mending fences, caring for the horses he bred and trained, and hunting to supplement their supplies. Silas Morgan visited regularly, always treating Scarlett with a grandfatherly affection that warmed her heart. Through these visits, she learned more about Hayes than he had revealed himself. "He was the best marshal these parts ever saw," Silas told her one afternoon as they shelled peas on the porch. "Fair-minded and brave as they come. This territory was safer with Hayes wearing the badge." "He told me why he gave it up," Scarlett said softly. Silas nodded solemnly. "That business with the young woman. Tragic accident. Wasn't his fault. That gang was firing wildly and Hayes was trying to protect the townspeople, but he's always carried the weight of it." The old man glanced toward the corral, where Hayes was working with a spirited young mare. "He's a good man who believes he isn't. Reminds me of someone else I've come to know." His knowing look made Scarlett blush and change the subject. But Silas's words stayed with her, echoing in her mind as she watched Hayes over the following days. A good man who believes he isn't. The description fit them both, she realized. two people defined by their mistakes rather than their virtues. October turned to November, bringing the first dusting of snow to the hills surrounding the ranch. The evenings grew longer, and Scarlett and Hayes fell into the habit of sitting before the fire after dinner, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence. Scarlett shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of her parents' loving but strict household, of her dreams before life had taken its unexpected turns. Hayes was more reticent about his past, but gradually, pieces emerged. He had grown up on a farm in Missouri, enlisted in the Union Army at 18, and seen horrors that still haunted his sleep. After the war, he had drifted west, eventually pinning on a marshal's badge in Idaho territory until the fateful day that ended that chapter of his life. "I never asked you why," Scarlett said one evening as they sat companionably before the fire, she mending a shirt while he cleaned his rifle. "Why you stopped to help me that day in Caldwell. You didn't know me. You had no reason to risk yourself." Hayes was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and thoughtful. "I saw something in your eyes," he said finally. "Not just fear, determination, like someone who'd been knocked down but was still figuring out how to get back up." His hand stilled on the rifle. I admired that. The simple honesty of his answer caught Scarlett off guard. Most men wouldn't have noticed. "I'm not most men." He set the rifle aside and looked directly at her. "And you're not most women." The intensity in his gaze made her heart beat faster. Something was shifting between them, had been shifting gradually over these weeks of shared meals and conversations and quiet evenings. Scarlett wasn't sure she was ready to name it, but she could no longer deny its presence. "No," she agreed softly. "I suppose we're both a bit outside the ordinary." Hayes smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his solemn face and made him look years younger. "That's not such a bad thing to be." As November deepened toward December, the weather turned harsh. Heavy snowfall isolated the ranch, making trips to town impossible. Scarlett worried about becoming a burden. Consuming supplies meant to last Hayes through the winter, but he dismissed her concerns. "I always stock more than I need," he assured her. "And having you here means the supplies are being put to better use. My cooking would just waste good ingredients." They celebrated Thanksgiving with a meal that showcased Scarlett's growing confidence in the kitchen, a roast chicken with all the trimmings, including a pumpkin pie made from the last of the autumn harvest. Silas and his wife Martha joined them, bringing homemade wine and filling the cabin with laughter and warmth that seemed to chase away the winter chill. As Martha helped clear the dishes, she pulled Scarlett aside. "I haven't seen Hayes this happy in all the years I've known him," the older woman said quietly. "Whatever you're doing, please don't stop." Scarlett felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not doing anything special." Martha patted her hand. "Sometimes just being there is special enough." Her eyes, kind but perceptive, held Scarlett's. "He cares for you, you know, more than he likely admits even to himself." The observation left Scarlett flustered and thoughtful long after their guests had departed. Did Hayes care for her as more than a responsibility, a person he had saved and felt obligated to protect? And if he did, what of her own feelings? She had sworn off romantic entanglements after Samuel's betrayal, convinced that independence was the safer path. Yet in these quiet months at Silver Creek Ranch, something had blossomed inside her, something warm and hopeful that fluttered to life whenever Hayes entered a room or their hands accidentally brushed while passing the coffee pot. 2 days after Thanksgiving, the first major blizzard of the season struck. Wind howled around the cabin, driving snow into drifts that quickly obscured the paths to the barn and corral. Hayes spent hours securing the livestock and ensuring the horses had adequate shelter and food. When he finally returned to the cabin, he was covered in snow, his face red with cold despite the scarf wrapped around his lower face. Scarlett helped him out of his frozen coat and pushed him toward the fire, her hands lingering on his broad shoulders longer than strictly necessary. "You're freezing," she chided, pouring him a cup of hot coffee laced with a splash of whiskey. "Here, drink this." Hayes accepted the cup gratefully, their fingers touching briefly in the exchange. "The animals are settled, should be fine until morning." "And you'll be fine once you warm up properly." Scarlett wrapped a quilt around him, concerned by how cold his skin felt. "You shouldn't have stayed out so long. Had to make sure the yearlings were secure. They've never been through a blizzard before." He sipped the coffee, color gradually returning to his face. "This is good. Thank you." Scarlett busied herself preparing a late supper, trying to ignore the strange tension that seemed to fill the cabin. Perhaps it was just the storm, the howling wind making the walls creak and the windows rattle. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something building between them that neither had been brave enough to acknowledge. They ate in silence, the usual easy conversation replaced by meaningful glances and quickly averted eyes. When Hayes finally spoke, his voice was hesitant, unlike his usual confident tone. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down his fork, "about what happens when spring comes." Scarlett's heart stuttered. The unspoken question had hovered between them for weeks. "Oh, you mentioned wanting to move on, find work somewhere new." He studied his plate as if it held great interest. "I was wondering if you'd given more thought to what kind of work or where you might go." "I haven't, honestly." Scarlett realized it was true. Somewhere along the way, the urgency to plan her next escape had faded. "I suppose I've been too comfortable here." Hayes looked up then, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. Would staying be so terrible? The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning beyond the simple words. Scarlett set down her own utensils, suddenly unable to pretend this was a casual conversation about practical arrangements. "Staying as what, Hayes?" she asked softly, her heart pounding. He stood abruptly, moving to the window as if checking the progress of the storm. But Scarlett suspected he was gathering his courage. When he turned back to her, his face was more open, more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "As whatever you want to be," he said finally. "My housekeeper, if that's all you want. My friend, which I hope you already are." Or, he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Or," Scarlett prompted, rising from her chair to stand before him. Hayes met her gaze directly. "Or as my wife, if you could ever see yourself caring for a man like me." The proposal, clumsy and heartfelt, brought unexpected tears to Scarlett's eyes. "A man like you," she echoed. "You mean an honorable, kind, brave man who risked everything to save a stranger." "I mean a former soldier with blood on his hands," Hayes corrected quietly. "A man who lives apart from civilization because he doesn't quite fit in it anymore. A man with nightmares and regrets and not much to offer beyond this cabin and some horses." Scarlett stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "That's not how I see you." "How do you see me?" The question was barely a whisper. She reached up to touch his face, her fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. "I see the man who whispered let me do it anyway when I said I didn't deserve saving. The man who gave me his bed and slept on a too-small sofa for months without complaint. The man who looks at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken." Hayes caught her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers through her body. "You are precious, Scarlett. To me." "And you to me," she admitted, finally giving voice to the feelings that had been growing inside her. "I never expected to find someone like you. I'd stopped believing such men existed." Is that a yes? Hope brightened his eyes, making him look younger and lighter than she had ever seen him. Instead of answering with words, Scarlett rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a statement. But when Hayes's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, it deepened into something more certain, more passionate. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Scarlett smiled. Yes, Hayes Landon, that's a yes. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the cabin, a different kind of storm had broken, one that had been brewing since that fateful day in Caldwell, when a solemn cowboy had decided a woman in trouble was worth saving, regardless of the cost to himself. Their wedding was a simple affair held in early spring, after the worst of the winter had passed, but before the busy season of ranching began in earnest. Silas performed the ceremony in the Morgans' front parlor, with Martha and a few of Hayes's more distant neighbors as witnesses. Scarlett wore a cream-colored dress that Martha had helped her make, with wildflowers from the newly thawed meadows woven into her hair. Hayes, standing tall and handsome in his best shirt and newly pressed trousers, looked at her with such undisguised adoration that Scarlett's doubts, and there had been many in the quiet hours of the night, melted away. This was right. This was where she belonged. I take this woman to be my lawfully wedded wife, Hayes said, his voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was her turn, Scarlett's voice trembled slightly, but her conviction was unwavering. I take this man to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. The simple gold band Hayes slipped onto her finger had been his mother's, kept safe all these years for a bride he hadn't been sure he would ever find. The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on Scarlett. This man, so careful with his heart and his hopes, had entrusted both to her. The celebration afterward was joyful but modest, a feast prepared by the women of the community, music provided by a fiddler from the next valley, and dancing that continued until the lamps burned low. As husband and wife, Hayes and Scarlett thanked their guests and rode home under a canopy of stars, the future stretching before them like the vast Idaho sky. Their first year of marriage brought challenges, as all new beginnings do. Scarlett had to learn the rhythm of ranch life, the demanding schedule of breeding season, the vigilance required during foaling, the constant work of maintaining fences and buildings and land. Hayes had to adjust to sharing his space and his decisions, to considering another person's needs and wishes after years of solitary existence. But the adjustments came more easily than either had expected. They worked well together, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Scarlett's practical efficiency and attention to detail balanced Hayes's quiet strength and intuitive understanding of the land and animals. Under their combined care, the ranch flourished. With the profits from that year's horse sales, Hayes built in addition to the cabin a proper kitchen with a larger stove and more counter space, knowing how much Scarlett enjoyed cooking. She, in turn, surprised him by learning to ride and help with the gentler horses, freeing him to work with the more spirited animals that required his expert touch. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch swing Hayes had built as a wedding gift, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and pink. Sometimes they talked of the future, of dreams both old and new. Sometimes they simply sat in contented silence, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, the connection between them requiring no words. It was during one such evening, as summer waned toward autumn again, that Scarlett shared the news she had suspected for several weeks. "Hayes," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The look that crossed his face, wonder, joy, and a flash of fear quickly mastered, was one Scarlett would remember for the rest of her life. Hayes knelt before her, pressing his lips to her abdomen through the fabric of her dress, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "A baby," he whispered, looking up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Our baby." Scarlett ran her fingers through his hair, her own eyes misty. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He rose to sit beside her again, gathering her close. "Scarlett, I never thought I would have this, a wife, a child, a family of my own. I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve it." "Then let me tell you that you do," she said fiercely, echoing his words from long ago. "You deserve every happiness, Hayes Landon, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." The months of Scarlett's pregnancy brought a new tenderness to their relationship. Hayes was attentive to the point of hovering, which occasionally tested Scarlett's patience, but more often filled her with gratitude for his concern. He built a cradle from pine harvested on their land, carving delicate horses along the headboard. Scarlett sewed tiny garments from soft flannel, each stitch a hope for the future they were creating together. Their son, Samuel Hayes Landon, was born on a crisp April morning in 1887, with Martha Morgan serving as midwife. Despite the pain and fear of childbirth, Scarlett felt a sense of triumph and awe as the squalling, red-faced infant was placed in her arms. Hayes, who had paced anxiously outside during the labor, was summoned in to meet his son. The sight of this strong, capable man cradling their tiny baby with infinite gentleness made Scarlett fall in love with him all over again. "He's perfect," Hayes whispered, tracing a finger over the baby's downy head. "Just like his mother." Life settled into a new rhythm, one dictated by feedings and diaper changes, by first smiles and tiny discoveries. Young Samuel, nicknamed Sam, thrived in the clean mountain air and loving environment of Silver Creek Ranch. By his first birthday, he was taking wobbly steps across the cabin floor, reaching for his father with gleeful determination whenever Hayes entered the room. As their family grew, so did their prosperity. Hayes's reputation as a horse breeder spread, bringing buyers from as far away as California. The additional income allowed them to hire help, a young ranch hand named Tobias, who proved invaluable during the busier seasons, and occasionally a local girl to assist Scarlett with household tasks when Sam's energy became too much to manage alongside her other responsibilities. The threat from Caldwell had long since faded. They learned through Silas, who had connections throughout the territory, that the shopkeeper who had accused Scarlett had himself been arrested for embezzlement the following year. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, but the news brought closure rather than satisfaction. That chapter of their lives was firmly in the past. When Sam was 3, a second child joined the family, a daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah, after both their mothers. Lizzie, as they called her, was as fair as her brother was dark, with Hayes's blue eyes and Scarlett's delicate features. The two children became inseparable as they grew, partners in exploration and mischief across the expanding ranch. The years passed in a tapestry of ordinary days and special moments. There were difficulties, a particularly harsh winter that threatened their livestock, a summer drought that tested their resources, the normal challenges of raising spirited children in a remote location. But through it all, Hayes and Scarlett faced each obstacle together, their partnership strengthening with each trial overcome. By 1895, Silver Creek Ranch had expanded to include a larger herd of horses, a respectable number of cattle, and fields of hay and grain that made them largely self-sufficient. The cabin had grown as well, with additional bedrooms for the children and a proper parlor for entertaining the increasing number of friends and neighbors who were drawn to the warmth of the Landon home. On the 10th anniversary of the day Hayes had rescued Scarlett from certain capture in Caldwell, they rode together to a hilltop overlooking their property. Below them, the ranch sprawled in neat fences and well-maintained buildings. In the distance, Sam and Lizzie played under the watchful eye of Tobias, who had become like family over the years. "Did you ever imagine this?" Scarlett asked, gesturing to the peaceful scene below. "That day when you found me hiding behind that water trough?" Hayes shook his head, his arm tightening around her waist. "I was just hoping to get us both out alive. I never dared dream of all this. I remember exactly what you said to me that night by the fire." Scarlett turned to face him, her hands resting on his chest. "Then let me do it anyway. You had no idea what you were taking on. Best decision I ever made." Hayes kissed her, a gentle touch that still held the passion of their early days together. "Even if you were the most stubborn woman I'd ever met," Scarlett laughed, "and you were the most frustratingly honorable man. Do you know how long I waited for you to kiss me?" "Too long," Hayes admitted with a rueful smile. "I was afraid of rushing you, of taking advantage, always the gentleman." She rested her head against his shoulder, content in his embrace. "I wouldn't change a moment of it, you know. Not one step of the path that brought us here." As they stood together, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains, Scarlett reflected on the journey that had led to this place, this life. From a desperate woman fleeing false accusations to the mistress of a thriving ranch, mother to 2 beautiful children, and wife to a man whose quiet strength and unwavering love had healed wounds she'd thought would never mend. She had once believed she didn't deserve saving, that her mistakes and misfortunes were somehow a judgment on her character, a fate she had earned. Hayes had shown her otherwise, had demonstrated through years of patient love that worth wasn't something to be earned but something inherent, a birthright that no circumstance could diminish. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Hayes asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Scarlett smiled up at him, at the face that had become as familiar and necessary to her as her own heartbeat. "I was thinking about deserving, about how sometimes the things we think we don't deserve are exactly the things we need most." Hayes nodded, understanding as he always did the deeper currents of her thoughts. "And sometimes what looks like saving someone else turns out to be saving yourself." "Is that what I did for you?" she asked softly. "Saved you?" "Every day since Caldwell," he confirmed, his voice husky with emotion. "Every single day." As they rode back down the hill toward their home, toward the children who would soon be clamoring for dinner and stories and one more game before bedtime, Scarlett felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt and fear, of adjustment and compromise. But the destination, this life they had built together, was more beautiful than any she could have imagined for herself. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet save for the crackling of the fire, Hayes and Scarlett sat together on the porch swing just as they had done countless evenings before. The stars scattered across the Idaho sky seemed especially bright, nature's own celebration of their milestone. "I have something for you," Hayes said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much," but he placed a small wooden box in her hand. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a delicate gold locket. When Scarlett opened it, she found a miniature portrait of their family. Hayes, herself, Sam, and Lizzie painted with remarkable skill. "Hayes, it's beautiful," she breathed, touching the tiny faces with a gentle finger. "When did you arrange this?" "Last time I was in Boise," he admitted. "There was an artist there who works from photographs. I had that one we took at Christmas." He looked almost shy. "Do you like it?" In answer, Scarlett threw her arms around his neck, the locket clutched tightly in her hand. "I love it. Almost as much as I love you." As Hayes fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin at her nape, Scarlett thought about the long, strange journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate flight from danger to this peaceful homecoming, from strangers to soulmates, from a woman who didn't believe she deserved saving to one who had found not just rescue but redemption in the arms of a solemn cowboy with kind eyes. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Landon," Hayes murmured, drawing her close. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Landon," Scarlett replied, settling into the embrace that had become her sanctuary. "Here's to the next 10 years. And the 10 after that," Hayes added, "and all the years we have left." As the night deepened around Silver Creek Ranch, two people who had once believed themselves unworthy of happiness held each other close, surrounded by the life they had built together, proof that sometimes the things we think we don't deserve are exactly the things the universe knows we need most. The years continued to unfold with the changing seasons, each bringing new joys and challenges to Silver Creek Ranch. Sam grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. By his 15th birthday, he was already showing a remarkable talent for working with the most difficult horses, an intuitive understanding that even Hayes sometimes marveled at. Lizzie, 2 years younger, developed into a bright, curious girl with a passion for books and learning that had Scarlett ordering volumes from as far away as San Francisco to feed her daughter's voracious mind. In the spring of 1897, their family expanded once more with the unexpected but welcome arrival of Thomas Silas Landon, named for Hayes's father and their dear friend, who had stood by them from the beginning. Tommy, as they called him, came into the world with a lusty cry and a shock of red hair that had Hayes joking about hidden Irish ancestors. 3 children, Scarlett mused as she nursed the infant one evening, watching Hayes attempt to untangle Lizzie's long blonde hair after a particularly adventurous day exploring the creek. "Did you ever imagine we'd have such a full house?" Hayes smiled, his hands gentle as he worked the brush through his daughter's locks. "I never imagined having any family at all. This is beyond anything I could have dreamed." Their happiness was tempered in 1898 when news came of Silas Morgan's passing. The old man had died peacefully in his sleep, but his absence left a hollow in the community and especially in the Landon household. Hayes had lost not just a neighbor, but a mentor and friend who had believed in him when few others did. At the funeral, standing beside Martha as she accepted condolences, Scarlett was struck by how central the Landons had become to the tight-knit community that had grown up around Silver Creek. Families who had settled in the area over the years looked to Hayes for advice on everything from horse breeding to water rights. Young couples sought Scarlett's counsel on homemaking and child rearing. Without planning it, they had become pillars of this small society, respected and valued for their knowledge and integrity. "Silas would be proud," Martha told Hayes as they walked back to the wagons after the service, "of the man you've become, of the family you've built. He always said you just needed the right reason to open your heart." Hayes's arm tightened around Scarlett's waist. He was right about that, and about many other things. Martha, though grieving, found purpose in becoming an even more frequent visitor to Silver Creek, doting on young Tommy and teaching Lizzie the finer points of lace-making and preserving that had been passed down through generations. Her presence helped fill the void left by Silas's passing and gave her a sense of belonging that eased her loneliness. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, change came even to their remote corner of Idaho. The railroad expanded, bringing the outside world closer than ever before. Hayes embraced certain innovations, a new plow that made preparing the fields easier, improved breeding techniques that strengthened their horse stock, while remaining skeptical of others. Scarlett found that regular deliveries of catalogs and newspapers kept her connected to the wider world without requiring her to leave the home she had come to love. In 1905, a significant change arrived at Silver Creek, with the construction of a proper schoolhouse just 5 miles from the ranch. Until then, Scarlett had taught the children at home, using books ordered from Eastern publishers and her own considerable knowledge. The prospect of formal education excited Lizzie particularly, who at 13 was hungry for learning beyond what her mother could provide. "Will I still be able to help with the horses after school?" Sam asked anxiously when the subject was first discussed. At 17, he was already taking on significant responsibilities around the ranch, working alongside Hayes and dreaming of one day breeding his own line of quarter horses. "We'll work it out," Hayes assured him. "Education is important, but so is the practical knowledge you're gaining here." Watching her husband and son bent over the breeding records, heads close together as they discussed bloodlines and conformation, Scarlett felt a swell of pride and gratitude. This life, so different from anything she had imagined during those dark days in Caldwell, had become richer and more fulfilling than she could have dreamed. The family's reputation continued to grow along with their prosperity. Hayes's horses were sought after throughout the West, known for their intelligence, stamina, and even temperament. Scarlett's preserves and baked goods won ribbons at county fairs, and her advice on household management was sought by young wives throughout the region. Their 20th wedding anniversary in 1907 was marked by a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. The ranch yard was decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, tables groaning with food contributed by every family in attendance. A small band played while couples danced under the stars, and children chased fireflies through the warm spring evening. Standing at Hayes's side, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Scarlett was struck by how far they had come from that desperate night when a solitary cowboy had risked everything to save a woman he didn't know. "What are you thinking about?" Hayes asked, noticing her pensive expression. Scarlett squeezed his hand. "About beginnings. About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best." Hayes nodded, understanding as he always did. "About how a woman who didn't think she deserved saving and a man who didn't think he deserved happiness somehow managed to find both together. The years brought inevitable changes. Sam, at 21, married Mary Ellis, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and built a small house on the eastern edge of Silver Creek property. Lizzie went to school in Boise, returning with a teaching certificate and a determination to ensure that rural children had the same educational opportunities as their city counterparts. Tommy, growing tall and lanky like his father, showed an unexpected aptitude for numbers and business that promised to serve the ranch well in the future. Through it all, Hayes and Scarlett remained the steady center around which the expanding family revolved. Their love, tested by time and circumstance, had only deepened over the decades, evolving from the urgent passion of young love to something more enduring, a partnership of equals, a friendship that encompassed all aspects of life, a commitment that neither had ever regretted. In 1917, when word reached them of America's entry into the Great War in Europe, A new kind of fear touched their lives. Sam's oldest son, Henry, at 18, was determined to enlist despite his parents' concerns. Hayes, remembering his own experiences in the Civil War, tried to dissuade his grandson but ultimately respected the young man's decision. "Just promise me you'll come home," Hayes told Henry the night before he left for training. "This ranch, this family, it'll all be waiting for you." Scarlett, watching her husband embrace their grandson, saw the echo of the young soldier Hayes had once been, remembered the nightmares that had plagued him in those early years of their marriage. She prayed that Henry would be spared such scars, that the world he returned to would be the one he had left. The war years brought rationing and worry, but also a renewed sense of community as neighbors banded together to support each other and the distant war effort. Silver Creek Ranch, now run primarily by Sam with Hayes's guidance, contributed horses to the cavalry and food to the local drives. Scarlett organized knitting circles that produced socks and scarves for soldiers, while Lizzie's school collected books and writing materials to send overseas. In 1919, Henry returned home thinner, more solemn but blessedly whole in body if not entirely in spirit. Hayes, now in his late 60s with hair gone fully silver and lines etched deep around his eyes, spent long hours with his grandson, not pressing for stories but offering the quiet companionship that had helped him find his own peace decades earlier. "You knew, didn't you?" Henry asked his grandfather one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house. "What it would be like, what it would do to me." Hayes nodded slowly. "I had some idea. War changes a man. How did you learn to live with it?" The question held all the confusion and pain of a young man trying to reconcile the person he had been with the one he had become. Hayes's gaze sought out Scarlett through the window, where she sat reading to their youngest grandchildren. "I found someone who saw me, really saw me, and loved me anyway. Someone who believed I deserved a second chance, even when I didn't believe it myself." The wisdom of those words stayed with Henry, guiding him as he gradually found his way back to civilian life, eventually courting and marrying a quiet, steadfast woman who possessed something of his grandmother's perceptiveness and compassion. As their family continued to grow through marriages and births, Hayes and Scarlett modified the main house, adding rooms and modern conveniences while preserving the original cabin that had witnessed the beginning of their journey together. The ranch expanded as well, incorporating new land and adapting to changing markets and technologies. By their 40th anniversary in 1927, Hayes and Scarlett presided over a family that included 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. Silver Creek Ranch had grown to encompass over 2,000 acres, with operations that included not just horse breeding but cattle raising and crop production as well. On the evening of that anniversary, Hayes surprised Scarlett with a ride to the hilltop where they had often gone to watch sunsets and reflect on their life together. Despite his 74 years and the arthritis that sometimes troubled his hands, he was still a capable horseman, sitting straight in the saddle as they followed the familiar trail. At the summit, a small table had been set with linen, silver, and crystal, a recreation of the fine dining Scarlett had known in Boston before her journey west. Sam and Mary waited to serve them a meal that rivaled anything found in the finest restaurants, then discreetly departed, leaving the couple alone with the spectacular sunset and a lifetime of memories. 40 years, Scarlett marveled, reaching across the table to take Hayes's weathered hand in hers. At 65, her auburn hair had faded to a soft gray, and lines of laughter framed her eyes and mouth. But to Hayes, she was as beautiful as the young woman he had rescued so long ago. "The best 40 years any man could ask for," he replied, his voice gruff with emotion. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the velvet sky, they sat together on a blanket, shoulders touching, hands entwined. Below them, lights twinkled in the windows of the ranch houses where their descendants lived and worked, continuing the legacy they had built together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help me that day?" Scarlett asked softly. "If you had ridden past that water trough without looking back?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I couldn't have done that," he said finally. "Not because I'm particularly heroic, but because something about you called to something in me, as if some part of my soul recognized yours." Scarlett rested her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "I'm glad it did. For a woman who didn't think she deserved saving, I've been remarkably blessed. And for a man who didn't think he deserved happiness," Hayes added, pressing a kiss to her temple, "I've been granted more joy than I could have imagined." The years continued to pass, bringing changes both great and small. The stock market crash of 1929 and the subsequent depression tested the resources and resilience of Silver Creek Ranch. But the self-sufficiency Hayes and Scarlett had always valued served them well during those difficult times. The ranch became a haven for extended family members who had lost jobs or homes, with every spare room filled and additional cabins built to accommodate those in need. Hayes, though slowed by age, remained active in ranch affairs well into his 80s, offering wisdom earned through decades of experience. Scarlett continued to be the heart of the family, preserving traditions and mediating the occasional conflicts that arose among the growing brood of descendants. In the winter of 1935, Hayes contracted pneumonia after a long day helping to repair fences damaged in a snowstorm. Despite the best medical care available and Scarlett's constant attention, the infection settled deep in his lungs. As January gave way to February, it became clear that this was one battle the old cowboy would not win. Family gathered from near and far, filling the main house with subdued conversations and memories shared in hushed voices. Sam took charge of practical matters, while Lizzie organized the younger generation to ensure that household tasks were managed and children cared for. Tommy, now a successful businessman as well as a rancher, handled financial concerns, ensuring that his mother would be secure regardless of what happened. Through it all, Scarlett remained at Hayes's bedside, reading to him from favorite books, reminiscing about their life together, or simply sitting in companionable silence, her hand in his. Though weakened, Hayes retained his clarity of mind and his dry sense of humor, often making observations that brought reluctant smiles to worried faces. On a clear, cold morning in mid-February, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and turning the snow-covered landscape to diamonds, Hayes asked to speak with Scarlett alone. The family respectfully withdrew, leaving the couple in privacy. "Scarlett," Hayes said, his voice thin but steady, "I need to say something while I still can." She leaned close, her heart constricting with the knowledge that their time together was drawing to an end. "I'm listening, my love. Thank you." His eyes, still that remarkable blue despite the years, held hers intently. "For every day of happiness you've given me, for our children and grandchildren, for making me believe I deserved a good life after all." Tears welled in Scarlett's eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to be strong for him. "You deserved every bit of it, Hayes Landon, and so much more. I've had more than most men dream of." His hand tightened briefly around hers. "I'm not afraid, Scarlett. I've lived a full life. But I want you to promise me something. Anything," she whispered. "Live the rest of yours just as fully. Don't shut yourself away in grief. The ranch, the family, they'll need your strength and wisdom, and you deserve to find joy even without me." Scarlett couldn't hold back her tears then. "How can there be joy without you?" Hayes smiled faintly. "You'll find it, in the children and grandchildren, in the life we built together, in the knowledge that what we had was real and lasting and worth every moment." They talked through the day and into the evening, sharing memories and dreams, reaffirming the love that had sustained them through 48 years of marriage. As night fell, Hayes drifted into sleep with Scarlett still holding his hand, her head resting beside his on the pillow. He passed peacefully before dawn, slipping away as quietly and dignified as he had lived. Scarlett, who had dozed briefly, awoke to find the hand in hers grown cool, the beloved face finally at rest. The funeral was held 3 days later on the ranch, as Hayes had requested. He was laid to rest on the hillside where they had often watched sunsets together, with a simple headstone bearing his name, the dates of his life, and the words "beloved husband, father, and friend." He saved more than he knew. In the days and weeks that followed, Scarlett was sustained by the family that surrounded her with love and by the knowledge that she had kept her promise to Hayes. She did not shut herself away, but remained engaged in ranch affairs, offering guidance when asked and step by step withdrawing to allow the younger generations to take control. She found unexpected comfort in keeping a journal, recording memories of her life with Hayes that she wanted preserved for future generations. The writing became a form of conversation with him, a way of keeping him present in her daily life even as she moved forward without him. "I think of that night by the campfire often," she wrote one evening, "when I said I didn't deserve saving and you whispered that you would do it anyway. I didn't understand then what those words truly meant. I thought you were offering temporary sanctuary, perhaps redemption from immediate danger. I never imagined you were offering a lifetime, a family, a legacy that would continue long after both of us were gone." Spring came to Silver Creek Ranch, and with it new foals in the pastures, calves in the fields, and fresh growth in the garden Scarlett had tended for nearly 5 decades. Life continued in its eternal cycle, reminding her daily of Hayes's wisdom about finding joy even in the midst of loss. On a warm day in May, she visited his grave, bringing wildflowers gathered from the meadows he had loved. As she arranged them against the headstone, a sudden breeze lifted her hair now white as snow and brought the scent of pine and sage from the surrounding hills. "I miss you every day," she said aloud, knowing no one was near enough to hear. "But I'm keeping my promise. I'm living, Hayes. I'm finding joy in the life we created together." As she stood to leave, Scarlett noticed a young couple walking hand in hand along the creek that gave the ranch its name. Great-grandchildren, or perhaps great-great-grandchildren. She couldn't be certain without her glasses. Their laughter carried on the breeze, young and full of hope, a reminder that what she and Hayes had started would continue long after they were both gone. Scarlett smiled, touching the locket she still wore after all these years, the one Hayes had given her on their 10th anniversary. Inside were the faded portraits of their family as it had been then, a moment preserved in time even as life moved relentlessly forward. "You saved me," she whispered to the memory of the solemn cowboy who had changed her life with a simple act of courage, "even when I didn't think I deserved it. And in saving me, my love, you saved yourself. You saved all of us." With that, Scarlett Turner Landon turned away from the grave and walked slowly back toward the ranch house, where family waited and life, in all its complexity and beauty, continued to unfold a testament to the enduring power of a love that had begun with the whispered words, "Then let me do it anyway."